Hi, everyone. Gene here. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, where every single week we answer the most common and uncommon questions about tapping in EFT so you can eliminate self-sabotage and take the actions that you want. I have a special announcement before we jump into today's show. Here in the United States, for those of you who are outside of the United States, the way that the medical system works, it is possible for families, even when they are insured, to end up with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical debt, just trying to take care of the needs of their family. There's a really amazing organization here in the States called RIP Debt or RIP Medical Debt, which helps to alleviate that problem. And because of the way the organization is structured, for a single dollar, in many cases, hundreds, if not a full $1,000 of medical debt can be relieved for a family in need. To support that effort, for the rest of the month, I am running a sale on my 3 most popular digital products. They're all 50% off, and 100% of the sale price is going to go to this. So, for example, if you bought the cheapest product that I'm offering, which is my NLP for EFT program, for only $25, you're going to be in a circumstance where you could help to alleviate as much as $25,000 of medical debt for a family. And I know it sounds crazy. So go to tappingqa.com/RIP. That's tappingqa.com/RIP to see all of the details, to see how you can investigate the organization that I'm going to be working with. And you too can take advantage of this deal.
I think emotional hijack is a really good expression or a concept for parents to have, because teenagers are in emotional hijack territory quite a lot of the time.
This is Gene Montreux-Stellade. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to date from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 373, originally aired July 24th, 2019. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today, we're going to have a conversation about tapping for the adolescent brain and how tapping can be used by teenagers to help regulate themselves, but more importantly, how parents can use tapping to shape the way that their young people grow up, so that when they grow up into emotionally mature and emotionally healthy adults. Before I do that, I just want to send some thanks out. As you know, every single week, we have been thanking people from all over the world for listening to the podcast. And so this week, we want to thank people who have downloaded the show in Albania, the Bahamas, Belize, Lebanon, Syria, Tajikistan, and Togo. I really appreciate the fact that you've taken time to download the podcast. If you would like to support the podcast so we can continue to offer this resource that is downloaded by people all over the world, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/support. That's tappingqa.com/support. Not only can you support the podcast so we keep being able to provide these amazing free resources, we're also in a situation where you're going to get some amazing thank you gifts for doing exactly that. Thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting the podcast. Today's conversation is with Janey Downshire. I met Janey a number of years ago at the EFT Gathering in the north of the UK. And Janey was speaking on the adolescent brain. And her and a co-author of hers wrote this really amazing book called Teenagers Translated. And the book was so good in the original form that before my flight had landed at JFK, as I was flying home from London, I'd finished the entire book, just absolutely devoured it. And they've done a revised version of the book. And the reason why I love Teenagers Translated so much is it explains how and why the adolescent brain works the way that it does. And more importantly, what we can do as adults around young people to help to take care of them. Oftentimes when I am traveling, I get the opportunity to do a workshop for parents. And the workshop is called What Were You Thinking? And the reason why the workshop is called that is because whenever a teenager does something foolish, the first thing that the adult around them asks them, so what were you thinking? And in often cases, particularly for our adolescent young men, they weren't thinking anything at all. And so over the course of this conversation, what Janey helps us to unpack is how and why is the adolescent brain so unique? And at the beginning of the interview, you're going to hear a really interesting fact about the adolescent brain and the amount of change that is going on inside of there. Second, once we understand what is happening, how as adults can we function around teenagers so that they are able to be more emotionally mature? And some of that's going to involve some tapping. And then finally, what are things that we can impart on our young people so that as they are navigating this biochemically and emotionally difficult time of adolescence, how they can do that in a way that is easier in the moment. And also on the other side of it, they have emotional maturity and emotional mental health. And again, tapping is going to be involved in that. So it's a really lovely conversation. If you do not have teenagers, there might be someone in your life who you want to pass this one along to. If you interact with teenagers, this is something that's going to be super useful for you. And then especially for my parents out there, if you have an adolescent or you have a child who will be an adolescent someday, then you're going to want to know this information. It's really useful. Here is my conversation with Janey. At a very basic level, to a lay person, what is the difference between the settled and unsettled brain? How do we get there? How does that impact us day to day?
Right. So if we think about the brain being the engine that drives us, so it causes us to feel a certain way and to obviously think a certain way, but it's also our behavior as well. And so depending on what's going on around us or inside us, we're either going to feel good about our day or not good about our day. So we're going to end up dropping into a sort of unsettled state. And that is going to involve us worrying, feeling stressed, perhaps feeling anxious inside, but also looking as if we are not that happy as well. So it's...
And so what are the consequences of being in an unsettled brain state? Like, what is going on inside of my body? How is that impacting my ability to make choices and navigating the day other than just being a bit of a grumpopotamus, as you just described?
Sure. Well, it's going to be impacted by how you respond and react in the moment. So the brain, if we imagine we've got like a periscope that's constantly scanning our world and deciding, am I okay? Am I not okay? And what that's doing is then triggering the release of lots of different chemicals into the body. So cortisol being the principal stress chemical. And that's getting us ready to fight, flight, freeze. Yep. And that's then causing our brain to sort of only focus about whatever the stressful situation is that we've got in front of us. Now, for our child, that might be a fallout with a friend. It might be a roll of the eyes from our parents. It might be we've got a bit of bad work back or whatever. But basically, we're going to be feeling inside, almost like our neurobiology inside us is going to be more agitated. So we are going to feel more agitated. We're going to know that we don't feel sort of calm and relaxed. But also our brain can start to worry and think quite negatively at that stage as well.
And so what it sounds like inside of that answer is that when we go into fight, flight, or freeze in this unsettled brain state, it's not actually about whether or not there is trouble around us. It is our perception about whether or not there is trouble around us. And it's a complete interpretation that is going to trigger us into that state.
Correct. Yeah. So the brain, that bit of the brain is millions of years old. And so it's responding as if it were a saber-toothed tiger or worse. And so it's not a rational decision to react in that way. It's the brain's survival mechanism that just says, I need to run, I need to fight, or I need to play dead.
And the one of my favorite examples when I'm thinking of that is like that sense of when I'm doing something like giving a presentation or sitting down to take a test, when my brain goes blank, it's all that oxygen's been squished out of my brain so I can literally run away. And I love the description of we're perceiving it as if it is a saber-toothed tiger. And that thing that is in front of us is not a saber-toothed tiger, but our biochemistry doesn't know the difference. It just feels danger and scared.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And, Daniel Goleman talks about this emotional hijack. So, in a very simplified way, when our emotional areas of our brain get flooded by that stress chemical cortisol, basically the door to our ability to be able to think clearly and rationally shuts. So at that moment, we are at the mercy of all those sort of, all those different emotions. So yes, when we're making a speech or we're sitting in an exam, our brain can go blank because it's like the red mist descends or the wheels come off, however you sort of describe it. But basically, we're not able to sort of be logical and rational at that moment. So I think emotional hijack is a really good expression or a concept for parents to have, because teenagers are in emotional hijack territory quite a lot of the time.
Yeah, and one of my favorite examples of that is if a teenage boy has done something that isn't very thoughtful and something ends up broken, the first question a parent asks is, "What are you thinking?" And his typical response is, "I don't know." And it's not being smart. Like, he's not being a jerk in that moment. That emotional hijack that you're talking about is true. Like, he literally doesn't know what he is thinking because that door is shut. And it's so valuable for us, any of us who works with teens, but particularly parents, to recognize the fact that that's what's going on in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can often feel, particularly with teenage boys, that they are, as you say, that they're like sort of withholding information from you. They don't want to tell you. So when they kind of grunt in response to something, we think, well, why don't you talk? Or why aren't you telling me things? And the male brain, supposedly, according to sort of scientific studies, the male brain finds it much more difficult to translate feelings into articulating how it is. So when you ask a boy, how do you feel? He finds that really, really difficult and is likely to respond with anger and frustration because he can't articulate it. And yet we think he's being, as you say, rude, difficult, or whatever. And it's not that.
Yeah. So the first part there, we just spent all the time just talking about settled and unsettled brain, which we all experience. Like, all of us go into fight, fight, or flees, and that's what happens. So what are the unique characteristics of the adolescent brain? Because you mentioned the fact that particularly adolescent boys, spend more time in this unsettled state. What is unique about that time period? What is going on in the body? What is going on in the brain that makes this particularly pronounced?
Sure. So the areas of the brain responsible for thinking, planning, deciding, sort of being logical and rational, the areas of the brain that will, when the child is an adult, will be hopefully kind of working really well. They'll be able to weigh up choices and make decisions and so forth and solve their problems. That bit of the brain is work in progress. So it's not yet there. It hasn't dropped into place yet. And it's almost like if we see that area of the brain, which is the cortex, imagine that area of the brain as like the brake pedal. And the limbic area of the brain, which is the more emotional area of the brain, is like the accelerator. And that area of the brain, which also houses things like the reward center, that area of the brain is programmed during adolescence to seek and be curious, to take risks, to experiment with things. So it's part of the process that a child goes to separate from home, is that they start to push the boundaries and start to want to push out and cast their kind of attention outside the home. And this a rise in another chemical called dopamine gives them the confidence and the drive and the get up and go to take those risks and do that. So as a parent, what you're juggling with is a child who seems to know exactly what they want to do, and they want to go out more, and they don't want to work, and they want to spend more time online, and they want to try new things out and get out with their peers. and they appear to be quite strong and quite confident. But I think it's helpful for parents to know that the areas of their brain that will help that teenager to weigh up and decide the consequences of perhaps doing certain things or getting involved in certain things, that bit of the brain is still work in progress. And the ability for a teenager to manage their emotional self is also still work in progress. That kind of wiring almost hasn't gone down into the subcortical areas of the brain yet.
And so what it sounds like you're saying there is that it's almost like the perfect recipe for unthoughtful high-risk behavior. There's a part of me that's craving adventure and trying new things, and the part of me that is weighing whether or not this is a really good idea isn't completely fully functional yet. So the pushing forward is big, the holding back is really, really small in that particular moment. And as you describe that, I think of myself in my teenage years and me and my buddies doing cliff diving in a place at a reservoir that was literally the dumbest thing we could be doing with our lives at that particular point. And yeah, it was fun. And like literally danger never crossed our mind.
No. Yeah. It's exciting. I think particularly the male brain finds risk exciting. The female, a female brain, that doesn't necessarily mean a girl's brain, but a brain that has less testosterone might be slightly more risk averse, probably. But yes, for boys, and you might say to your teenage son, "So didn't you think that if you did jump off the cliff and that something might happen, that it might be dangerous, that you might die?" And you go, no, I didn't think about that. Because when the tail is up, and particularly when teenagers are in a group, they're something like 30% more likely to take risks than if they're on their own. On their own, they will probably think more clearly, but it's being with the group. So in a car, with a group of teenagers, they're probably a very good driver, but it's that group sort of mentality that is exciting. And it's a real survival thing. They need to be part of a group. So really important for us as parents to celebrate the fact that they are in a social group, that they are bonding with other people, that they are taking risks, obviously risks that aren't going to cause damage.
And so is part of that, and you might just be guessing on this, is part of that because of this, we have that very ancient part of us is tribal, because thousands and thousands of years ago, if we were pushed outside of the tribe, we died. Like the tribe was literally a matter of life and death. And so when I am with a group, there is a driver that is saying, I need to be a part of the group. And so if someone is saying this is a good idea, there's a part of me that's more willing to go along with it because of the survival instinct of wanting to stay inside of the group. And then we put together a group of boys who aren't really good at thinking about consequences, and it starts to escalate as they're trying to navigate all of that. Is that kind of what's going on in that circumstance? Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So there's, on the one hand, there's the need to be part of the group, as you say. Right. And on the other hand, there's a real fear of exclusion, because that is certain death.
Right.
Because if you're not in the group, you're going to be eaten by the saber-toothed tiger.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about kind of adolescent boys and how adolescent boys have some particular challenges because of their desire to do these high risk behaviors, because of the dopamine, because of the group, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What is the experience? How is it the same or different for adolescent females as they're navigating this?
Right. Well, girls as well are definitely needing to be part of the group. And I think the social connections for girls are sort of even more important. But I think the difference would be that they're slightly more needing to trust and bond with other girls and feel safe within that group. I mean, we could almost sort of imagine back in the cave that if the men were off hunter-gathering and doing their risk-taking things and not looking out for dangers, but the women were needing, in order to care for their young, they were needing the friendship, the close friendship of other females. That's really important. And so your teenage girl will typically, if she has a fallout with her friend, it's like life and death has happened. Whereas a boy will have a few punches and then they'll just get a football out and kind of move on. Whereas girls have a much more lasting resentment. It's more difficult to get over those ruptures.
It's really interesting as you say that. So for years and years and years, I officiated what we would call here soccer, what you would call football. And it was interesting where if there was conflict, and this is a generalization, not every time. If there was a conflict between two guys, there would be a conflict between two guys. It would escalate. It would de-escalate. We would move on. Where when officiating female soccer, I could be in a circumstance where it was something that happened 6 months ago. And out of nowhere, one player's acting up against another player, and there's no context to it, where it was almost more difficult to navigate because with the guys, it was right in front of you. And you literally could see the emotion escalate and de-escalate, where oftentimes with female soccer, that wasn't the case. Like literally it would feel like it comes completely out of the blue because an official, I don't know the social relationships between the young women I'm officiating, but it is something that you're talking about where it is longer lasting and more permanent in the way that they understand themselves in those relationships.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hell hath no fury.
Yeah. And so I guess just from the outside, as you talk about this, it just makes a lot of sense where you could be in a circumstance where, as an adult from the outside, looking at some of these social dynamics, being puzzled because intellectually the slight feels like it is no big deal. Yes. And for the young person who is going through it, as you described, it feels biochemically as if it is a matter of life or death. And they're not acting from a place of thinking through the actual consequences, but it's this primitive thing of I am being excluded, therefore it's going to turn into this really horrible thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And I think then what that moves on to is that starts to fuel certain sorts of thinking. And I guess that kind of leads us into sort of mental health habits that are starting to get established at this time, which is, I guess an important thing for parents to start to understand a bit more about that.
Yeah. So now that we kind of have groundwork here, understanding, and just as a side note, I think I remember either hearing you say this or reading it in the book, you mentioning the fact that the biochemical changes that's happening in the adolescent's brain is more dramatic and more change is happening than at the time of the terrible twos. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes. I mean, there's a big growth spurt. During, a child between the ages of 2 and 3. And we know that, brain science knows now that there's an awful lot going on in the brain and it correlates with difficult behavior. But of course, now they realize that the brain changes. There's never more neurons in the brain than in a 10-year-old child. So it's been this massive growth spurt. And then from the age of around about 10, so the onset of puberty, so when you start to see slight behavior, slight hormonal changes starting, that's the beginning of a massive pruning back process. So it's almost like a tidying up operation that goes on for a long time. And that's the neuroplasticity.
And so I think it's important for us to just kind of touch on that for parents to hear, because as a parent, to look out in this time period. It has this special name, the terrible twos, that is what's going on, that we don't talk about the adolescent brain in the exact same way, just to give some parents some context so they recognize the fact that this is kind of normal. Even though it is erratic what is going on, this is typical as part of that adolescent development. And that's not to excuse the child's behavior and just to let it go, but so you're not going, oh my gosh, I have this little monster under my roof. How do I deal with this thing? How do I communicate with it? Like, this is what happens, and this is what these years look like. Absolutely. And to accept, exactly as you say, it's normal. We all went through it ourselves. Right. But what we have got is I think, the visible evidence that you're there is the behavior.
And I think, parents, obviously you have difficult behavior from children always, unsettled, unsettled. That's all normal. But in adolescence, I think it's going to likely to be a bit more pronounced, a little bit higher or lower, so more extreme in either way. And that's a sign. And very gradually, it all starts to kind of settle itself down over the years.
And so I think I recall from reading the book is that at this point then, as we're working with adolescents as adults in their life or as parents, that the goal then is to spend more time in the settled brain and less time in the unsettled brain. Is that correct?
Well, yes, or to be able to move smoothly between the unsettled and the settled. So inevitably, on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis, let's say a teenager is going to be encountering all sorts of things all the time. So they are going to be feeling okay, not okay, threatened, not threatened, all the normal ups and downs. But it's being able to move from your unsettled back to your settled, which is effectively resilience, to be able to bounce back behaviorally, emotionally, mentally, socially, whatever it is, it's being able to do that. And the point about adolescence is that you need to learn to do that independently of your parent, because you are a codependent, not codependent, you are a dependent infant, and your parent took responsibility to wipe the tears, cheer you up, sit you on their knee, give you a kiss and a cuddle and set you back on your way. But independence means learning how to do those things for yourself.
Now that we kind of see this as what our young people are navigating their way through, if the goal is to seamlessly move them from one to the other and to start to teach them how to do that independently, how then, as parents and adults in young people's lives, what are some of the things that we can start doing to help that process happen?
Sure. Well, one of the simplest things to explain, but not necessarily the simplest thing for us to do as parents, is to when everything starts to spiral emotionally between, let's say, you, the parent, and your teenager, that in that moment, we want to be trying as the adult to drop our anchor and just not, not follow the spiral, as it were, not escalate the situation, because we are role modeling how to either get unsettled and angry and upset, or we're role modeling how to recognize, okay, things are starting to get a bit out of control here. I need to just have, a few seconds time out or whatever it is, but I need to stop this escalation now. So one of the simplest things we can do is just to try to show our child what it is that they should be doing at that time.
And I can see how difficult that is, because if we're in a circumstance that we can see the choices that they're making are really unrational, and being super frustrated by that fact, to being able to put ourselves in check. And it's so funny. I have lots of conversations with parents like, my child is acting up. How can we get my child to tap for this thing? And what you're describing in this particular circumstance is the best thing that we can do is to get ourselves emotionally in check. And to take a few moments to get ourselves back into a settled brain state. And maybe it's doing a little tapping or a breathing exercise or stepping away for a moment. And that does two things in what you've described. One is we're not escalating. And two, we are demonstrating this is the way that, even if we're not explicitly saying this is the moral of the story, they're modeling us constantly, that it makes it really, really simple for them to start to be able to process and understand. Is that kind of the implication of all of this?
Absolutely. So it means that we're not having an emotional hijack. We're able to think clearly in the moment. So the first thing is to put our own life vest on and think, right, I need to be able to think clearly in this moment. And it might just be a question of saying to your child, I'm too angry to talk about this now. Now is not a good time for us to go into this, but we're going to talk about this later.
So it's almost as if we are putting an end to what is going wrong in this moment, and then we're going to have a conversation about making good choices, consequences, how to navigate once we're both in a settled brain state, so that we can actually have a conversation and being able to be conscious and deliberate about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that what teenagers can get very upset about is when we, in the moment, or I mean, and I know people have always, I know I find this very frustrating. People say, just calm down.
Right, because telling someone to do that is the fastest way to calm down.
Exactly. So whatever we are doing as the parent to get ourselves calm, what we are not saying in that moment to our child is, I need to calm down, you need to calm down. We need to get ourselves rational so we can talk about this. And so it's not giving them a commentary about it. It's just doing it.
Yeah.
So it's just saying, I'm too cross. I'm going to go and walk the dog, or I'm going to go and make a cup of tea now. But in 10 minutes, I'm feeling better. And then we've got to talk about this because it's important.
And so as I think about this, I think of my own father. He would go to work super, super early. And so whenever there was something that needed to be dealt with, it typically happened at my father's office at 6 a.m, which did a couple of things. One, it was an amazing power play because he had been up for an hour and I was still groggy trying to deal with whatever I was dealing with. But the other was exactly that. It wasn't when I got home in the evening after missing a curfew or making a bad choice. It was great. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. Yeah. And just being thoughtful and deliberate, like, okay, now we can have a really different conversation because neither of us are escalated and we can work our way through this thing in a way that makes a great deal of sense.
Yeah, no, it's so good that. And I think, I think what parents have to do in that moment is not go into too many why questions and to go back and to rake back over what went on. Because that's going to sort of re-escalate the situation.
Absolutely.
To be very clear and just to say, listen, you missed your curfew. We had a deal. So I'm upset and I'm really disappointed. So, how are we going to? So it's then getting into more of a, how are we going to avoid this happening in the future? Talk me through it.
Yeah.
You're handing them the responsibility. You're also training them to start to think for themselves, to start to have plans and to be able to articulate those plans and to start to become accountable and self-governing, which is what the whole independence process is all about. We need to get them to exercise those bits of the brain. Imagine those bits of their brain were muscles. In the car conversation, we need to not be telling them the answer. We need to be asking the question.
And so I'm guessing in a circumstance like this is where us as adults in their life, it's super important that we have clearly articulated expectations and clearly articulated rules and values and all of those things about what time you're going to come home, but also what is appropriate inside of our family. Because if we need them to be learning how to do this for themselves, it's difficult for them to do that if we're not demonstrating this is what expectations are, so that it's easier for us to internally start building them ourselves.
Sure. And I think as much as possible, where you can start to give your teenage a stake in those negotiations, where it becomes a bit too authoritarian, a bit too dictating. Today's children, young people, learn in a different way. They don't learn in a didactic way, which we all did at school. They learn to be, to be in an analytical way. So they're learnt to take information and to weigh up and decide. That's what they have to do.
Right.
It's not good for us to just say, this is the deal in our household. These are our values, these are our family values, or this is where the boundary is at the moment. We can discuss it. As you grow up, of course, those boundaries, they are going to sort of dissipate, as you grow up. But right now, this is what the deal is. When you're old enough to be able to choose, that you want to spend all night gaming, well, then that's fine. When you're earning the money to do that and it's your job that's at stake, then that's great. But while you're under my roof or our roof, this is the deal. And then you discuss it as well. So you say to them, okay, so what's the curfew tonight? And, they'll say 3 a.m. and you'll say, well, I was thinking more like 11. And they'll say, okay, well, I could be 1. And you say, well, listen, I'm happy with 12:30 or whatever. So they then agree to that.
Right.
Boundary.
And I can also see in creating the boundaries, underlying the reason for the boundary becomes really useful. We've used the word values a number of times here. So it's not just the curfew is this time because I said this is the curfew is this time, but this is what we're doing tomorrow as a family, or this is what you need to do to be being healthy because you need to be sleep, whatever it is. So it's not just this is the rule because I say it's the rule, but starting to have the conversation as to, and it doesn't mean that the value is negotiable or the rule is negotiable, but we're having a conversation. So there's a level of understanding and it's not just an edict that has been pinned to the wall that we're all doing. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think for most families, we try and encourage most families to have some core values that are non-negotiable.
Right.
And certain values, if you want to call them values, boundaries or whatever, like tidiness, that you might set a certain boundary around it, like a bedroom, and just say, that's your space. And, you do what you want in your space. But, once a week, it needs hoovering, or once a week, the washing needs to move to the washing machine.
Right.
That's your space. But what I'm not going to have is your dirty stuff lying in front of the door, your shoes where I trip over them. So that's where there's a bit of flexibility there, that we almost respect their independence and respect them to start to kind of work things out for themselves.
Yeah. Now, I can see it inside of this, that like this conversation being helpful and then also a little bit of knowledge being dangerous, where a parent going, oh my gosh, even if they don't use this vocabulary, like I responded in an unsettled state and I blew up and oh my gosh, I'm wrecking my child because I'm not teaching them how to deal with this sort of stuff. Like what words of thought or encouragement do you have for parents as they're like navigating this and trying to take the conversation that we've had today and apply it in a way where it's being helpful without it being a stick that they're beating themselves up with because they're not doing a good job?
Yeah. Oh, I think this is something that anyone who is a parent will so often worry about. All the damage I've done, all the times that I've shouted and screamed at them, I've made the arguments kind of much, much worse. I think it's good just to just say, we'll always do the best job we can with the tools available sort of in our toolkit.
Yeah.
And to just think that, we are enough. We are enough. Being available as a parent is enough. To be there, to listen, to be consistent, to offer a safe haven of home with a home life with its routines and its rituals and its food in the fridge and, all the sorts of things that normally go on in family life. Those things are vital for a child to sort of grow and move smoothly to being an adult. And I think also for parents to trust your intuition. There is so much now, I think, with the internet that has invaded our homes, that what goes on in our homes is not necessarily, it's open for debate, I suppose. And so often our children will say, but this is so unfair. No one else's parents say this or do this, or this is ridiculous, and for us to trust our intuition, trust that we are providing that safe place, and to say to our child, when you're old enough, you will be able to go and do things your own way. But right now, this is what we stand for. And this is how we deal with problems. This is our rules on the internet. This is, our beliefs about other people. This is how we respect, each other in our family, all those sorts of things, to feel confident, I suppose, parents to feel empowered that what you are doing, if it feels right, it is right.
Right. And I think the other thing that we talked about earlier that I think is important at this particular point, this idea that they are learning how to navigate the world by our example, and seeing us in a circumstance where we're not doing it right and perfectly every single time, and we're course correcting and we're apologizing and we're doing the things that we need to do as good, thoughtful humans, that we're teaching them that it's okay for us not to be perfect as long as we are taking account for ourselves and we're coming back and we're trying to correct things, and we can struggle with things and don't immediately have to have the answer. And that becomes something that is useful in just demonstrating to them how we be thoughtful, functional adults in the world.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, for us to have, it's often that plea for, how do I keep the doors of communication open with a teenager when, they're trying to sort of take themselves off and be more with their peer group and things.
Right.
And I think, a good way is, as you say, to be more open with them about, actually, I've had a really bad day today, or I'm struggling a bit with whatever. But always, I think, for us to role model how we're trying to solve the problem, or how we're trying to provide solutions to ourselves for a situation. Yeah. So they start to get into that mental habit of not drama queening about it and going into it's awful, and being all kind of stressy, to actually see that when there is something that's difficult or challenging, that it needs proactive intervention. We actually need to do something about it. And we can keep showing them what we are doing, just small examples of that. And they will start to form a pattern for that. So the next time they're having a difficult, to say, well, what thoughts have you got? What are you thinking? What direction are you going to go in, or what's going to be best for you? And that's the sort of dialogue that starts to keep it open, is the fact that the parent isn't telling the child what to do anymore. It's asking the child what they're going to do. And that's how we then set ourselves up as being the go-to place for our child. Because at the moment, the go-to place is the internet, is social media. And that's really, I suppose, the main reason, I guess, for our book, for our courses, for everything that we do, is to help parents to have the sort of relationship and the sort of dialogue whereby they can continue to be the main guidance and influence to their child when our children are being lured away by the internet and by what everyone else is doing. And that's the real challenge for today's parents.
Right. And I think the last thing that's important inside of that is to recognize the fact that very rarely is any single interaction an all or nothing proposition. So we're not asking adults to be perfect around their kids all of the time in navigating this stuff, but it's consistently showing up, and it's the consistency over time that is what's going to help foster and deeper the particular relationship, but also model for them so they see us as a place to learn from. And taking a little bit of the pressure off the adults, saying you don't have to be perfect all of the time. Like, we want to be making good, better, thoughtful choices, and having this information is useful. And the fact that you didn't handle dinner perfectly last night and someone went storming away from the table doesn't mean that it's over. It was just one more incident, which means that we have an opportunity to just keep doing better as we're navigating all of this stuff.
I mean, providing your children with this perfect home life, you're not equipping them for the real world.
Right.
So ruptures, difficulties, arguments, disagreements, boundaries, all the sorts of things that we've been discussing today, navigating and negotiating and learning about those is learning the skills, the resilient skills to be able to cope and manage in the outside world. So yes, a perfect family home, it is not a good idea.
Right. Awesome. Well, Janey, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate the conversation today.
Pleasure. It's been really enjoyable. Thank you.
As you can see, just super useful, straightforward stuff. If you would like more information on Janey and the work that she is doing, all you need to do is go to tappingpodcast.com and click on the link for episode 373. If you go into the show notes, you'll see all of the links, including a link to the most recent version of Teenagers Translated, which, like I said, is an absolutely amazing book. If you know someone in your life who could use this conversation, if they have a teenager in their life, if they're going to have a teenager in their life, please, please, please pass this along to them. It would mean the world to me, and it will give them a resource that is really useful for them in the moment. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have a topic you'd like us to cover at some point in the future, please let me know. I can always be reached, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. If you're on the website, just click on that contact link. If you are inside of the app, all you need to do is click on contact. From inside of the app, you can send me an email message or you can leave a voicemail message right inside of the app. If you haven't downloaded the app yet, just search Tapping Q&A in both the Android and Apple app stores. In addition to having access to our entire back catalog of audio, you are also in a situation where you're going to be able to see any tapping script that we've used in the last couple of years. It's printed out right inside of the app, so you don't even have to hit play. You can just go look at the text and tap right along to it. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrestelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyrighted Gene Montrestelli, Tapping Q&A 2016. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli or Tapping Q&A.